May seem like I've been returning to Africa for every other video, and that's because lately I have been. Africa is such a huge continent and it has more countries than any other continent. And honestly, before starting researching for this channel, it's probably the continent that I knew the least about, so I felt it a little necessary to hit it just a couple times close together. But today the attention will focus on a topic that tends to get less attention in most of my videos. Nature. I've always been all about the history and the infrastructure, architecture, the people, the culture, and of course the physical land and the borders, but today we'll make a little bit of a shift. What better country to start with than Botswana? This is going to be similar to the 10 notable sites format that I tampered with, however we're going to specifically look at things that are found in nature or at least completely nature oriented. Because I mean, yeah, a natural park is technically a man-made concept, but all the things in that come from nature, usually. So with that, let's take a look at some of the beauty that Botswana has to offer. To get things rolling, we will start with the Kama Rhino Sanctuary. As you may know, rhinos are extremely endangered, so this is a pretty important point. Established in 1992, it is found to the east of the central part of the country in a sandveld region. Sandveld basically means it's a dry desert-like setting that still has some grasslands. This has started as a means to assist in preventing the disappearance of the rhinoceros and actually aims to restore other vanished wildlife as well. Now, of course, for the tourism industry, there are several different options for guided drives, but you can actually drive yourself or even walk around should you so desire. But it should be noted that some of these animals, including the rhinoceros, can be very dangerous. So be careful if you do this. Of all the rhinos here, only 4 of them are black, while the other 30 are the white rhinos, giving a total of 34 in case that math was too difficult for you. Besides rhinos, you can also find the African white python, being the longest snake in Africa, reaching nearly 4 meters. As Vincent Price might say, it is unfortunately harmless. Yes, that's correct. You could probably even touch one of these without getting bitten. Other mammals like giraffes and zebras are common, and even the blue wildebeest. That's basically a large antelope creature with curved horns that have also been affected by deforestation. I would also be pretty careful if you venture towards these. Now don't worry, as cool as animal conservations are, they will not be taking up this entire list. Moving all the way up to the north, you will actually find that Botswana does indeed have a tiny border with Zambia through the Zambezi River, and you probably thought it only bordered these 3 countries. This is called the Kgalagadi Border, where one can be in 4 different African countries at once: Botswana, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Namibia, thanks to this thin panhandle. This border with the country is only 150 meters wide, which means I could have actually ran the distance of a border in high school. And should you decide to take a ride down the Zambezi River, it's possible to see hippos and buffalo. There's also said to be a pretty vast amount of vulture species in this area, and for some of the best views, it's best to hit the river early in the morning. What we're about to jump into is just a little more vast. The Okavango Delta is essentially a giant wetland that's found in a vast dry region known as the Kalahari Desert, which is part of the greater East African Valley and Rift system. This exists thanks to the Okavango River, found in the highlands of Angola, flowing over to the Caprivi Strip in Namibia, that's the panhandle again, and busting into this unique shape out in the Kalahari. There's only about a 2-meter range in height across the entire delta, making it very flat, so the lack of topographical relief is what allows it to keep branching on and on and on. Now, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and about 60% of it gives life to plant species. And evaporation actually takes almost all of what's left over, so very little of it is left over to flow into Lake Nami. Depending on what time of the year it is, in the spring and early summer, this is very flooded before reaching its dry season. Thus, it ends up being one of the largest concentrations of wildlife in Africa, with the water and the plants drawing in plenty of animals as well. Vegetation like papyrus, lilies, and palm trees are all along the delta, as well as knobthorn trees, sausage trees, and plenty of other fauna. Elephants and hippos actually play a large role in shaping this region and keeping it the way it is, mostly because of what they consume. In fact, I believe the Okavango Delta has the highest concentration of elephants in Africa. The things they eat and the way they move has allowed the delta to change and extend paths, however. The hippopotamus will also open up larger channels of the delta, and because this is such a strange force of nature, there are actually animals that ordinarily may not be found in this type of environment, but they have nonetheless adapted to it. The lion panthera is definitely one of them, preferring to hang around areas where they can snag a zebra or impala, as well as small elephants. Nile crocodiles are also fairly common in the delta, and a lot of them prefer to prey on fish, particularly the large ones. Near the end of the wet season, the islands throughout create breeding grounds of termites that can form, and the high concentration of salt will kill off much of the vegetation until the next season. Now, if we just take a small step westward, we will go and see the SoDo Hills. This is another UNESCO World Heritage Site made up mainly of rocks, caves, depressions, and actually shelters. Quartzite rock formations are what give it this unique look as they rise from a sand dune on the side and a dried fossil lake bed on the other. It's said to have housed primitive people for over 100,000 years, playing a large role in modern humans' connection to nature. As a matter of fact, it's got the largest collection of cave art all throughout it, with paintings everywhere giving it the nickname Louvre of the Desert. These are said to originate spanning anywhere from the Stone Age all the way up to the 19th century, giving insight to certain aspects of early human life. In fact, to some, it is a place of worship, and it is seen as sacred to the Hambakushu and the San people groups. How such a thing has remained preserved so nicely for so long likely has to do with how remote it is. It's got a very low population density, and also this type of rock is really good at withstanding erosion. Jumping to the other side of the Okavango Delta is the Chobe National Park. This gets its name from the beautiful Chobe River, which forms a little bit of the border with Namibia. It winds through otherwise sandy terrain through villages before reaching this park region, and obviously this is what draws lots of game. If you haven't noticed a pattern yet, this is also known for a large elephant population. You'll also find herds of buffalo and prides of lions. Truly shocking stuff. More interestingly, however, is the second longest lizard in Africa, known as the leguavan, and spotted hyena are also common. Most of this wildlife can be found by the riverfront, which is also very accessible to humans. Otherwise, the Linyanti marshes hold a lot of the predators, and the Savuti area is quite remote for all the hippies that like to connect with the vibes. This all became protected as a game reserve in 1961 and became a national park in 1968. So far, we've spent a lot of time in the northern region, so we're going to move down south. The Kgalagadi Transfrontier Park is actually administered by both Botswana and South Africa, as it covers such a vast amount of land. Again. This is actually an unfenced project that started in 1999, and I believe you can enter and exit through either way on both sides of the countries. An important point here would be where the Two Rivers and the Twee River meet. Yes, it is actually called Two Rivers, which also forms part of the border with the otherwise desert setting between two countries. And then there's also the dried Nosab riverbed, making for much of the park falling into Botswana territory. Now, as a matter of fact, these fossil river valleys cause a very rough terrain along with lots of dwarf trees and bushes, so perhaps you'll want to use a 4x4 vehicle. Lifted truck ego bros, this is your time to shine. We haven't really discussed the many bird species found in Botswana yet, so this is a good place to start. Some of the ones included here are the sociable weaver, the ground scraper thrush, the red-headed finch, the pale chanting goshawk, and the roadrunner. Okay, yeah, that one's a joke. Staying in the southern regions, we're going to get real close to the capital of Gaborone and look at the Kgalagadi Hill. This is obviously another common touristy spot that many people like to hike up to, as it reaches an elevation of about 1,287 meters. Depending on the time of year, one might encounter the beautiful and aptly named Kalahari Christmas tree, which looks like this. Or you could enjoy a Morataloga fruit on the way up, as those trees are everywhere. There are of course concrete paths for those that would prefer something more direct, but for the adventurous types you can use scrambled rock trails to go up. That's going to allow for more wildlife to be seen, such as baboons, mostly because it's trekked far less often. Oh, and there's actually a quarry with the same name that's apparently quite a spectacle to see from way up top. You can also see the aforementioned capital and the Gaborone Dam. And this part's rather unfortunate, but there is apparently a little bit of an issue with littering. Come on guys, it's 2024. Are we really still doing this? Ah yes, it's time for another larger one, the Makgadi Pans, moving northward again. Much like the Okavango Delta, this is a massive land anomaly that you can actually see the shape of on Google Earth from far away. But oh, is it anything but a wetland. Essentially, the Makgadi Pans is a giant salt basin, being not only the largest salt pan in Africa, but in the entire world, covering over 16,000 square kilometers. This was once the center of a massive lake that would have evaporated over time and been entirely gone by 2,000 years ago. However, during the rainy season, they do sometimes fill up and attract loads of zebras, which also attracts their predators. During these wet months, this is a heavy breeding ground for pink flamingos, probably one of the most important grounds for that on the continent. And as a matter of fact, there was a time when the Zambezi River would have flowed all the way into this directly. Lots of salt and sodium carbonate mines can be found here as well, playing a large role in the nation's economy. If you zoom in further on Google Earth, you can actually see this, and while it looks like agricultural fields, at a glance, they are actually well fields full of water to process the minerals. But what's really neat is simply the long and seemingly endless backdrop of the white background. kind of gives a bit of an isolated feeling, but in a good way. And the lack of light pollution lets this be a wonderful spot to stare at the night sky. As one can imagine, there are plenty of campsites and places for tents, as well as safaris and four-wheeler rides. Gotta capitalize on this stuff as much as you can, am I right? Speaking of capitalizing and mining, let's move to the Juaning diamond mine. Now I get it, this is technically considered a man-made thing, but it's the stuff that's under the ground that people are actually interested in. And I mean, look at this thing. It's the richest diamond mine in the world, and one of the largest ones as well, up there with the one we talked about in the Lesotho video. All of this stuff would obviously be why the British brutally gotta work with the algorithm. All of this was discovered in 1972, and it reached full production about a decade later. The open pit mine consists mainly of Paleoproterozoic age sedimentary rocks, and as of this year, it's actually a project in motion to establish some underground expansion. The total depth right now is 452 meters and is said to double within the next decade. And to close things off, I guess we'll talk about one more game reserve, this one being the Central Kalahari Game Reserve. This can be found in, wait for it, the Kalahari Desert. And surprise, surprise, this is also a UNESCO Heritage Site. There were several hunter-gatherer tribes that lived out here for thousands of years, including the Basarwa and the Kgalagadi, showcasing just how well some people can make do with such a harsh climate. While much of this terrain is very rough and arid, there is the occasional acacia woodland to be found scattered throughout. One might encounter the black-maned lion, being the largest variation type of lion in the continent. There's also the brown hyena, and both of these are considered a threatened species. So as you can imagine, this is once more an area pretty untouched by humans. And there we have it. I will admit that this is a bit of a tougher video to make, but who doesn't like a good challenge? A lot of people, actually. Botswana is totally worth looking into for all the nature lovers out there. It's so massive and it's so diverse, and because of all this, it is one of the best spots to go to for safaris. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I thank you so much for sticking around to the end. And a bigger thank you to those who like, comment, share, and subscribe. I will see you on the other side.